when you're in that state of timelessness, you realize how everything is connected to everything else. There are patterns everywhere, within patterns, within patterns, within patterns. And that's all you see from that higher state of consciousness. All you see is the perfection of the pattern. But then it doesn't just bleed into space, it also bleeds into time, right? And that's kind of a hard one for the human brain, because when time starts to break down and you start to see fractal patterns in time, you get to see, wow, there are cycles where things happen for reasons that we don't understand until later, but they're connected to something that happened before, which is connected to something that's going to happen later. And there's a perfect timing to everything. And if you know how to read that pattern, you're getting a glimpse into what's behind the matrix, the working, the underpinning of consciousness, of reality.
I'd like to welcome to the show Richard Rudd. How you doing, Richard?
Hey, good, Alex. Nice to be here.
It's such a pleasure having you on the show, my friend. Your work is kind of rippling across the world, and your story on how you got to the ideas in the gene keys, excuse me, are pretty remarkable. So, from what I understand, you had kind of like a download or spiritual awakening that brought this into the world. Can you kind of talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't like to use the word download. Everyone seems to use that. Everyone's downloading nowadays, you know. Um, but I had an experience, a kind of rare experience, I think, when back in my late 20s, that was in 1996, and I woke up one morning in my bed, and I woke up into another state of consciousness. So I went from sleep into awakened consciousness, and so it felt very natural, but it also was completely different. And so I stayed in that for 3 days and 3 nights, and it was in those days and nights I didn't sleep at all, that I kind of I mean, it's not like I knew what was happening to me, but and it's not like I received the gene keys or a set of teachings or anything like that. None of that came till way later, years later.
Mm-hmm.
But I did have a big revelation about truth and the nature of reality, and my destiny, I guess, and what I am, who I am, those kind of things. There were some personal things, but there was also a sense of remembering and coming home, and it was all very, even though my mind was just hugely expanded, I was also very present and very in my body. And I mean, I didn't eat anything either. I couldn't eat and I couldn't sleep. I didn't want to sleep because it was so captivating.
Blissful.
And yeah, so that was how it started.
Well, let me ask you, Richard. So when you said that you're an awakened consciousness, that's a fairly broad term. So for all of us who in the audience who have not been spiritually awakened and have been in spiritual consciousness like you have, what actually was going on? Were you seeing visions? Was it just a feeling of you just walking around kind of in this blissful high for 3 days? What was it exactly?
One way to describe it is through light. I was filled with light. I was lit up from within. I was illuminated from inside my being.
Mm-hmm.
And that light kind of just kept streaming through me and it didn't stop. It just went on forever, infinitely. And the other thing I experienced was zero resistance anywhere in my body. So no fear, no doubt, nothing, all of that normal human background unease was just gone, evaporated. And so I was in a state of complete freedom, I guess. It felt very natural, but I didn't really kind of question it at the time, I guess. It was just, okay, this is, and my mind was also kind of there on different levels, but the very human mind was sort of there inquiring and going, well, this is interesting.
Well,
I can find stuff out.
So did you start asking questions? Did you have a guide, or did anyone like show up and just go, "Hey, Richard, this is the time. Come with me." Nothing like that.
No, there was no guides because there was no sort of that wasn't that sense of separation
Mm-hmm.
between me and another being. Although I did have visionary states within
Okay.
the other
Sure.
state, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and so I kind of, because I was curious with my mind to know things, I trained my mind. I sort of, when I say I trained it, I kind of sent it into different directions, asking things. It wasn't like consciously asking questions. It was like, I wonder what death is like, you know, things like that. And then I would just explore the memory of dying and the kind of understanding of the process of dying, and it just all was there. And
Mm-hmm.
and lots of things I asked, you know, I was kind of nosy.
As you should be,
I
sir. As you should
Yeah, I
be.
was like, well, what about me? You know, who's this? What's this thing? And what's my future? And I was like, can I see in the future? It's like, and
How,
I, yeah, it was quite a thing.
so you know, there's a bunch of questions I want to ask you. One
Yeah,
is how since that time, you were what, in your late 20s when that happened?
yeah,
Yeah, so we obviously
yeah,
the smartest point in your entire life, the most evolved point of your entire life. You've only been downhill from there, obviously, because that happens to all 20-year-olds, or at least that's what all
exactly,
20-year-olds think at the
exactly.
time.
I was full of angst, is the reality.
That's the word, exactly.
Yeah,
So, since that moment, have you um figured out why this happened to you? Because this is a special, I mean, everyone's capable of doing what you did. That I
yeah,
understand. But you were just kind of like, you weren't looking for it. You just literally woke up into it, which is a pretty remarkable thing.
yeah. I think I'm kind of aware of some of the reasons behind that now because I've had a long time to contemplate it and sort of integrate it. And that wasn't easy in the beginning at all. You know, for years I was really confused and lost and kind of I at one point I thought I was the Messiah, and another point I just thought I just went into denial, and you know, when I say point, like some of those phases lasted several weeks, or
Mhm.
and so I had to make sense of it. But yeah, by now I have kind of made more sense of it, and I came across a teaching in from the Tibetans
Mhm.
where they call it tema, which means treasure, and these are like revelations that are kind of almost, it's almost like their idea of they're hidden in the past to be discovered in the future, and and what happens is they're revealed in the minds of certain lamas or initiates,
Mhm.
and they just spontaneously come alive like they've been waiting. And it was a bit like that experience for me. It's like I there was this transmission, this wisdom transmission that was waiting for me, and and then it came alive and inside me, and then I had to figure out what am I supposed to do with it.
No, and that's the thing is that when you're in your late 20s,
Yeah,
this happens to you. You're don't eat, don't sleep for 3 days. You
yeah.
come out of this, now you get slammed back into the real world, and now all those other things start happening. How did you process this event? I mean, this is some, I mean, look, I've had a couple of visions here and there just while I meditate, and it took me a minute
Mm,
to process things that I've seen in my meditations or experienced or felt aspects of what you're talking about. But
mm.
this is a completely different level, and with no training, no one there guiding you, nothing. How did you process this, man?
It just took time. Actually, I think being ordinary really helped, you know, and I was married, and so I had a child, and
Oh.
that helped because it grounded me, even though it was
Yeah.
very confusing. But in
Yeah.
those early days, I didn't have a structure or a form. There was things I was interested in. I got interested in like the human design system and the I Ching and all those things that most people have explored who are watching this. Um, and they kind of formed loose frameworks for me, some of those things, and helped me to kind of create a sort of sense of landing. There was one point where I went into a sort of mad professor mode, I remember, and I was downloading, and I kind of started receiving all kinds of things that became gene keys later, a teaching. And I had them up on my wall in my room, and I was just scribbling and writing and things, and it looked like kind of a mad scientist's sort of inside of his brain, because I was just seeing things and making connections, and that was quite a phase. Yeah, but I made sense of it slowly.
Now you mentioned something, and before I want, because we're going to go deep into the Gene Kings. Gene, I can't say that word. Gene Keys. I want to say Gene
Yeah,
Keen. Gene
yeah,
Keys.
yeah.
Before we go deep into the Gene Keys, you mentioned something about the structure of how we're made up. I'm assuming going into the DNA and understanding that. Is that what you're talking about?
Partly, yes. I mean, I had that experience of the DNA. I didn't know anything about DNA really much, but I had the experience of going into it, our DNA being like a wormhole,
Hmm.
in it. So we were made up of wormholes, and that and that reality is made up of wormholes. And at any point you can fall into one and come out in another dimension. And we are a kind of living repository of wisdom. And
Hmm.
it's just a matter of how do we, the structure of DNA is really interesting to me, because it's sort of the last line before the subatomic world, where you can't kind of, it's hard, that's where things start to kind of, reality starts to dissolve and become less reliable. So DNA is it's a fixed, but malleable, kind of quite plastic open system, that it's our software really. So it we can program it and reprogram it, and that's why it became really interesting to me, and that's why I kind of named the gene keys after genes and genetics and genius. And it's not because I'm an expert in that realm in any way at all,
Hmm.
but because I learned that that's a part of us, because my DNA
Hmm.
was literally exuding light.
Hmm.
Photons were coming out of it. And I was like, wow, it's actually in us, this light. It's actually in the matter of the spiral of our helix, where this light is wound up inside us. And then when it gets released as an illumination, or as a revelation, or as an insight, or a mystical vision, or just a burst of love, really. It's because it's actually kind of we're enveloped in it. Yeah, that was quite a thing to realize, that we're made of light.
Well, yeah, I've spoken to so many near-death experiencers who've talk about beings of light constantly.
Yeah, yeah,
Which I wanted to take it back a few 100,000 years, if we can, on this topic, because, and I just want to hear your thoughts on this.
yeah,
Every great civilization, every great culture, if you go far enough back, there is a origin story of humanity, which usually is sky gods, like beings, those kind of things, the Anunnaki in Sumerian
mm.
times. Do you have any insight to any of that during your work? If you've seen anything or heard, not heard, have you heard anything on the streets? No, have you had any kind of downloads or anything? Because if you go so deep into our genetics, these ideas, I'm just curious if you had
Yeah,
any
yeah.
cross-pollination in
I
that world.
did. I don't talk about it very often, because I don't want to. I guess I don't want to go too woo woo, but
Well, listen,
but
this
but
show,
since you asked, yeah,
since this show, I agree with you. I generally don't like to go woo woo, but with something like the Anunnaki, and then that's historical.
yeah,
It's on stone
yeah,
tablets, and it's
yeah, yeah,
everywhere. So
exactly.
it's not tinfoil hatty time. So
No,
that's
no, no. Well,
so.
it's one of the kind of understandings that I think Robert Grant and I kind of had together, where we would talk, where we
Mhm.
were kind of searching into the sort of source codes of what became Egyptian
Mhm.
mythology, but actually was earlier was something else. And so I did at some point. I had a memory for myself of the birth of my soul,
Mm.
and on this planet. And what I experienced and was that I'd had a different kind of DNA, that enabled, in another reality, that had enabled me to, in that reality, to transcend the physical reality, right?
Mhm.
And that what had happened is I dropped a part of the DNA So one of the helixes, one of the strands, I dropped the third strand in order to come into this binary reality. And I'm not the only, and it was a metaphor as well as like, wow, that's what happens to higher consciousness when it wants to form into a human form. It has to drop that third aspect, which is the transcendent aspect, and then it makes a sacrifice and comes down into this double helix, in order to kind of become part of a dualistic reality, which is what we live in, and so I think that was a really profound thing, and because there was a lot of ancient teachings connected to that for me, and it was a sort of memory, physical memory that I had, as my soul kind of came down here. So I think that's why, when I had my other experience, I kind of had the memory of, well, that's what it's like to have the third strand operating, because if you have three, you have this essence of transcendence. And in my teaching through the gene keys and everything I understand, it's the entire universe is made up of trinities that are consistently embedded in each other in a fractal way, and they do pan out into other numbers and shapes and forms, but everything has this triplicate nature. And a lot of those ancient religions and things are all founded on that same truth, actually, of the trinary consciousness.
So do you think that these masters, these living masters, walking masters, ascended masters, avatars who had walked the earth at one point were able to re-engage that third helix to the point where they've become enlightened? The Buddha, Jesus, these kind of yogis, enlightened yogis. I'd just love to hear your thoughts on that.
I think there's some truth in that. I think there's a sort of residue of that third helix, that third, that third strand. I wonder sometimes whether when that, whether that's going to re-evolve for us. I suspect it is, in order that we can re-thread our connection to the divine, actually in the physical form. This was something that Sri Aurobindo spoke a lot about, that we would eventually transcend through the physical form, so we'd approach, reapproach our divinity, but by climbing through the, not beyond it, but kind of deeper into matter. So that's why Gene Keys is sort of based on this prophecy that's coming for us, a mutation in our DNA, because DNA mutates. That's the wonderful thing about it. It mutates, it changes over eons. And sometimes it changes really quickly. In fact, most of the times in our history, when species have changed, we change fast, usually because of some event or cataclysm or something.
So we've been talking about the gene keys a lot.
Yeah.
What are the gene keys?
Well, they are a way of kind of tracking and mapping the codes of consciousness, that we live in, and they're a kind of fundamental set of patterns based on the number 64, which is coincidentally, if you believe in that stuff, the number of codons we have in our DNA that we're made up of, and it's also, the heart of many natural systems, that we see around us, this 64-fold matrix. And it's even the reason that we can talk together right now, because it's a 64-bit matrix hidden in these screens that we're working out of. So it enables us to consistently travel through the cosmos. So it's a code. And the Chinese really tracked those codes well in their early evolution, like 5,000-6,000 years ago, in the form of the I Ching. And so I did some very deep contemplations of that I Ching. I used human design as well, which also picked up a lot of that, some of those threads, ancient threads, and wove them into a new tapestry. And eventually that became the Gene Keys, a system of tracking where, who you are, what your purpose is, using, I borrowed some of the some of the beautiful things of human design, because I'd studied with its founder, Ra Uru Hu, and I kind of started to reshape my own kind of understandings that was rooted in my experience, my spiritual experience. So I rethreaded a synthesis, and that's what the Gene Keys is. It allows us to understand our own nature better, and beginning with our shadows, really. So it's a map of our shadow patterns and how we can transform them into gifts and eventually into transcendent states. So it's a kind of it's a cosmic code of consciousness, and you work with it over a long period of time. It's it's something to contemplate deeply.
I mean, that's a tough, I mean, thinking about what you just said is so profound. And I'm just trying to think of like, man, when he decided to put this out into the world, the marketing campaign's rough on this.
Yeah, it is actually.
It is extremely, it's a long
I mean, the
explanation.
elevator pitch.
The elevator pitch is a good 2-3 hours. I mean, really.
Yeah.
So it's, and you put this out there. Were you kind of told in your contemplations like this needs to be birthed into the world?
No, I never really sort of had that feeling of that quite like that, but it was an impulse in me of it started to grow. I started to see the patterns. It started to form its own system, and then I was the first student, really. So I had to apply it to myself, and I needed it as well because I was like this kind of slightly screwed up guy who'd had a big spiritual experience and was trying to make sense of reality, and I had all the same problems as anyone else, probably more, and so I thought, well, I'm gonna use this to kind of make myself feel better. So like understand my relationships and learn, to heal some of the traumas that I'd collected from my childhood, and also kind of heal my relationship to money, or because we all have these patterns, these shadow patterns in us, things in our health and things that plague us, and so it became like a really good tool for me to kind of find peace in my life again. Because it might sound like it's great to have a hit of peace, but then you're back to normal, and that isn't
Right.
that's even worse.
Because you now know what
Yeah,
you know what peace is like. Yes, it matters.
exactly.
Like, is it better to love in to lose loss, or never to love at all? It's very it's very similar.
Purgatory, right?
It's exactly it. So it's like, at least if you have, if many of us who have not had massive spiritual experiences, just live along our life. But when you have had that kind of experience, that exists, and it's difficult to process the real world after that. And walking through it. Now you're talking about the shadow patterns and healing traumas. What does this system do? Like, let's say I have a trauma from a childhood, whatever that might be, with money, with relationships, whatever that might be. What is an example of what the Gene Keys could do?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of ways to approach the Gene Keys because it's a synthesis. It's got a lot of different windows to come in through. And they're very different, some of them. The most popular one is through the Gene Keys profile. So we created a profiler, and over the last sort of 20 years. And that's based on your time, date, place, and birth. So it has some astrological components, but it's very different from astrology. And it gives you a profile. So anyone listening to this, they can go to genekeys.com now and get your free profile and look at it, and you'll get a sense of, okay, this is a journey here. Because what you have is these stages or spheres that represent different aspects of your life, like your life purpose, and your kind of what you're here to do, and your kind of some of the aspects of your relationships, early relationships that kind of are embedded in you, your soul's quality, all those things. And there's a gene key for each one of these, so that of the 64 keys, you get different aspects according to the time, place you were born. So you can look and see, well, I have gene key 29 here, because there's 64, and they all have different meanings. And GQ29, it's shadow. It has 3 levels. They all have 3 levels: a shadow, a gift, and the siddhi. A siddhi isn't like a transcendent aspect.
Mm-hmm.
So GQ29 is the shadow of half-heartedness, right? And it's like, so there's a part of, if you have that key somewhere specific, there's a part of you that when you don't commit to something fully, and you won't because it's there, it just falls apart all the time. So maybe relationships, like you have a real issue with commitment, so or maybe your job, and you can't stay with it because you're doing something that doesn't really turn you on. And so that shadow is a part of you that's too afraid to probably do the thing that you really want to do until you realize. So half-heartedness then becomes a great lesson. It's great. And every gene key is a lesson for all of us, actually. So anytime you're doing something in your life in a half-hearted fashion, is destined to fail. Simple as that. So if you're in a relationship that you're kind of there because you're just like, killing time, it's not going to be fulfilling. And it's just not going to fulfill you. It's going to fall apart at some point. So why be there? And then the gift is commitment, right? So in half-heartedness is the gift of commitment. So it teaches you about commitment. And then the siddhi is devotion. So those are 3 levels. So devotion is when you've gone through the journey of commitment and you've come out the other side into this place where your heart is fully opened. And it's suddenly, the whole notion of doing anything in a committed way that's all so half-heartedness is a thing of the past. So that's an example of how someone might apply a gene key to aspects of their life. And it's a contemplative journey. So it's not a kind of therapy, but it's therapeutic. And you learn it yourself. So these are journeys, I've created a series of journeys that people can go on with their profiles, contemplating their keys, so that what you're doing is you're beginning to unpick the reasons why things are the way they are in your life. So it's quite
Richard,
profound.
No, it sounds amazing. It sounds extremely profound. My question to you is, I hate to use the word science, but what is the energy behind these knowings? Because like the I Ching or the horoscopes or astrology, there's something connected. So if you're looking at astrology, it's the placements of the planets and the stars have certain amount of energy and pull and certain time periods in the cycle of everything. What is that kind of thing for this? Because it just sounds so profound. Like I would ask you, like, what is it for the I Ching? Like I Ching is also something extremely profound. What is where is that base come from?
Well, it's like going back to the experience I had, and when you're in that state of timelessness, you realize how everything is connected to everything else. And you realize that not only is space kind of geometric and fractal and repeat and holographic. So in other words, there are patterns everywhere, within patterns, within patterns, within patterns. And that's all you see from that higher state of consciousness. All you see is the perfection of the pattern. But then it doesn't just bleed into space, it also bleeds into time, right? And that's kind of a hard one for the human brain, especially the scientific brain. Because when time starts to break down and you start to see fractal patterns in time, you get to see, wow, there are cycles where things happen for reasons that we don't understand until later, but they're connected to something that happened before, which is connected to something that's going to happen later. And there's a perfect timing to everything, and everything is connected to everything else in this fractal kind of time-space continuum. So when you look at a specific moment in time, you're looking at a very specific pattern, universal pattern. And if you know how to read that pattern, you're getting a glimpse into what's behind the matrix, the working, the underpinning of consciousness, of reality, which is what astrologers were trained to do in the old days, and still some of them can do it. But it's different, using the I Ching is different because you're looking at the fundamental pattern of 64. So you're really looking into the fractal nature of reality and its crystalline kind of makeup. And if you know how to read it, which is quite simple, actually, you
Hmm.
could kind of extrapolate all kinds of truths. You could actually read the future, if you really wanted to.
Hmm. In the future, based on the current path of the trajectory of the current path, which could be adjusted based on human choice or humanity's choice.
Yeah, to an extent. I mean, there's a level of, that's a big question, but there's a level of, at the highest level of consciousness, there's a level of choicelessness. There's a level of predestination.
Hmm.
But when we come down into these forms, we are given this sounds really hard. We're given the illusion of choice. And it is act from the highest level, it's illusion, because when you're at that highest level, there's no one to choose. That you don't exist. There's just the pattern unfolding in its perfection, right? But that would be boring
It's
unless you forgot.
no,
So
I
you had
understand.
to come down and forget.
No, and I understand what you're saying. And and if I may throw my translation in, or how I see what you just said, because it could, people listening are like, I have choice. What is he talking about? Like, no, wait a minute. The game that we're all in, the simulation that we're all in, there are
Yeah,
rules to this game. Okay. So
yeah,
the rules of this game is you have free choice, and you truly have a choice to do whatever you want down here. And also, to a level extent, as you go higher into the other realms after you pass, there's also choice of, I want to go back down, I don't want to go back down. But the higher you go, the less that even makes sense anymore, because you just are. You just
yeah,
you just be the
yeah,
moment that you're in. So it doesn't make, so it's the equivalent of me making Mario go left in Super Mario Brothers instead of right.
yeah.
It's an illusion. I'm controlling it, but it's a kind of
It's
illusion of choice.
it's true.
Yeah, but
Decisions happen.
mhm.
It's like, do you know what I mean? It's like they aren't actually made.
No,
They
it's
they happen. They are acausal in that sense. At the highest level, it's really
right.
hard for humans to fathom that. And there's a lot of science now kind of going towards this, which is
Mhm,
really interesting. And you're right, it is a simulation. And that
mhm,
64-fold matrix is kind of like the motherboard
mhm,
of the simulation. So
mhm,
that's why if you know how to understand the simulation, and it's actually not hard, and that's why I kind of create these programs so people can figure it out for themselves, because it's our intuition that helps us understand, you know, our reality and understand these shadows and how to transform them, because that's what it's all about, really. Because all the philosophy is great, but unless I can help someone transform their patterns, their shadow, so that they have a nicer simulation, I'm not really interested. It's like, you know,
so so
I
so
want to help
Richard,
people.
absolutely. No, absolutely.
Yeah,
I think we both do. That's why we do what we do.
exactly.
Uh, so when you were in your spiritual high, we'll call it, when you were in your late 20s, that little hit of bliss that you got for those 3 days,
Yeah,
I'm fascinated. I'm fascinated with the idea of our hardware. Our brain is very limited. It's not even 2-bit. It's not even 8-bit. We're talking about 64-bit. It's like not even 8-bit. We're not, it's Pong. It's Pong, and the universe is basically where Halo is now. Let's just say that difference. It's probably much bigger, but that difference. When you were in your spiritual awakening, it seems to me that you left the 8-bit or less 2-bit um, world, and were able to connect to the 64-bit world, because you kind of were not using this hardware. You were using another mainframe, or patched directly into the internet, where the hardware is not really relevant as much, because you can hook up to the internet with a slow processor or a fast processor, but the information's there, and how you download it, it's really up to bandwidth. Does that, any of that what I just said, make sense?
yeah, I love it. It's really great. I mean, in Jinkies, as I said, like we have, because people are interested, they can get the Gene Keys book. It's a big, huge book. It took me 7 years to write, with all where I go through the 64, archetypes, right? And there are 64 siddhis, right? And that's a Sanskrit word, siddhi, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it means transcendent, reality. And they are embedded in our body, right? So we have superpowers in here, right? And there are 64 of them, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you'll have certain ones that are just dormant. And you might in your life, if you are lucky, if you believe in luck, you might have a flash of one that just goes off. One of these little places inside your DNA just sparks, and then you have a sense of, wow, it might be a burst of universal cosmic love, unconditional love, or something like that just happens. It might, that just brings you to tears. It might be a complete silence where all
Mm-hmm.
thoughts cease spontaneously. There are lots of different layers to the cities, to these, but they're built into us. So you're right. There is a way that we can access the mainframe, and it is inside us, and it's part of it's the journey of the Gene Keys. It's really for the future, the Gene Keys, the knowledge, because it's to take us into the next stage of our evolution, where these dormant kind of superpowers can start to come online, and we start to inhabit that universal body, that universal mind, because there's a new kind of human coming, and we need, and this is going to require a mutation of us, inside us, in our DNA, in our species wide. I mean, it sounds quite wild, but it has happened in the past that we've mutated. We were Neanderthal, then it mutated, it became a Cro-Magnon. We've mutated, and animals mutate all the time. So life is built, DNA is built to mutate and to change and to evolve. So what my question with the Gene Keys is, what's the next human being look like? What's the future human being look like? And that's definitely written in my book. That's definitely written. You're invited to contemplate that. What does the highest you look like? So when you look at your profile, you'll see the shadow words, but you'll also see these city words. You'll see words like ecstasy. You'll see words like, rebirth. You'll see words like harmony. These are states of consciousness that are embedded inside you as a living potential. What would it be like to live only in harmony? Everything in your life in harmony.
Well, obviously, Marvel has already told us what the next stage of evolution is, and it's the X-Men, obviously.
Exactly.
So I'll take Wolverine's powers.
Yeah.
I don't know what you would like, but no, it was
I
really
kind of like that
fascinating.
lucky one,
Oh yeah, okay. What's her name? Domino. Yeah, Domino. She's
Yeah,
always
yeah, I love
lucky.
that.
Oh,
Yeah, that's for me is the ultimate superpower.
I mean, you're absolutely right. A Domino mixed with Wolverine would be fantastic. If we could do that, that would be
That's an
fantastic.
interesting looking creature.
It is someone who could completely regenerate and pretty much not die and has luck all the time.
Yeah,
And if
yeah, I
you
like
happen to
that.
mess with it, it has giant unbreakable claws, just in case something has to go down. Uh, no, when you
Mm.
were saying that sometimes if you're lucky, that little spark, you see a glimpse of that city, that power that's inside of you. It brought me to a story that Wayne Dyer said years ago, when he was alive. He's like, he was meditating one day, and all of a sudden he started to levitate. And if you've studied any of the yogic in the Vedic traditions, that's something very common with yogis. He goes, but the second he was levitating, his brain's like, oh, this is cool. I could do this in the Tonight Show. And the second he said that, he fell back to the ground and never was able to do it again. He
Yeah,
disconnected completely with it. But that was the first time, that was the only thing that came to my mind when you said that. I was like, oh, that must have been a glimpse of his superpowers, just one of those things.
yeah. It was one of the funny things that as I was sort of exploring this revelation that had come to me, and I was realizing, oh, there's these 64 cities, and that was the word I chose. And then I remember, because it's like way back, right? And the internet was still quite young. But I Googled 64 cities, and I found that there is a tradition in India of 64 cities. And I was like, wow, isn't that cool? That they track this, for thousands and thousands of years, they knew that this matrix was hidden inside us, you know. So those X-Men, all of that, that's kind of, in a way, preparing our minds for what's to come.
If you're enjoying this conversation, I invite you to go deeper down the rabbit hole with me on Next Level Soul TV. It's packed with exclusive content like live special guest Q&As, daily podcasts, commercial-free access to the entire Next Level Soul catalog, early access to episodes before they air, and special meditations you won't find anywhere else. We will be adding new exclusive content every month, plus you can connect with me during my monthly live streams. Just go to nextlevelsoul.com/subscribe and join our soulful community today. I'll see you on the inside.
In some way.
So so now you just opened up a whole can of worms, because now you're working into my world of story and movies and books and things.
Yeah.
The idea of this next evolution of humanity, which goes along with what we talk about on the show a lot, which is this great shift in consciousness, the great shift in humanity. And you can all kind of see that in the last 150 years, our consciousness has grown exponentially. Over the last, we've grew more in the last 150 years than we grew in the last 3,000 or 5,000, really. So there's a ramping up of this mutation in our consciousness, if you will.
Yeah.
But when you just said that, like, these movies, these ideas, these stories are preparing us for what's coming, I would 110% agree with you, because if you start thinking about H.G. Wells, and you saw before him, there was no idea. The science fiction world wasn't anything like it was, or Frankenstein with Mary Riley. And all these stories that prepared us for the space age, that prepared us for the Industrial Revolution. These ideas, then movies like Star Wars. I mean, how many astronauts and astrophysicists were born because of Star Wars and Star Trek?
Yeah.
I was talking to a NASA rocket scientist the other day, as you do, on the show. And she was telling me how much her colleagues absolutely adore Star Trek. Like, it's rampant throughout all of the quantum physicists and rocket scientists. They all have seen Star Trek. Star Trek more so for the scientific side.
Yeah.
The more kind of mystic sci-fi world, the more mystic you go towards Star Wars because of the Force.
Yeah.
Right,
exactly.
right. But with Star Trek was very scientific, very grounded. But even then, they were doing things that make no sense. And yet it prepared us for what's coming. So a lot of these stories in these movies, even like what's going on with Marvel with the multiverse, that just showed up. Parallel realities, that just showed up. Quantum realm, that just showed up. These are all Marvel ideas, from their comic books. And now people understand what the quantum realm is.
Yeah.
They understand what parallel realities are. They understand what the multiverse is. That was really geeky sci-fi stuff back in the day.
Absolutely. I mean, I was watching this thing on Netflix, Sense8. I don't know if you've seen that. It's kind
of
wild.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I
But
remember
that's
that.
like networked intelligence, right? And that's the next stage of the future human, is networked intelligence. So that we begin. That's the next phase. At the quantum level, where these different fractal groupings come together and discover a genius that is shared, at another level of consciousness. Because the ultimate one is when we're all a networked intelligence. We're all one network, which we are. But it's going to take us a little while to get there. So it's going to begin with smaller groupings, and then it'll expand. And that's, I described this in gene key 55, which is the kind of big mutative gene key that came and contains the prophecy at the heart of gene keys, which is about this future human. And it's fun.
Now, who wrote who the creators of Sense8 is, right?
Yeah, it's a woman, right?
No, it's the
Wachowskis.
The Wachowskis.
I was
it's the
thinking
Wachowskis.
Yeah.
The Wachowskis are, for everybody who doesn't know, the creators of the Matrix. So, which is also one of the most profound films that have prepared us for the idea of simulation theory, that this is all a game. Before then, it was deep in philosophical ideas or Vedic traditions, or even deep in the quantum physics world. But now everyone understands, like, oh yeah, And it wasn't it just a year or two ago that the Nobel Prize went to some quantum physicist who proved that we are in a simulation
I think so. I think
mathematically?
that there's a lot of it. Yeah, now it's an incredible thing, and the Buddhists have been saying it for years. The high Buddhist teachings, that's exactly
Hmm.
what they teach.
Well, Maya. It's like Maya.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even Christ, said in, my father's house has many mansions. I love that quote, which
Hmm.
is like all these different dimensions, that that
Oh,
exist.
that's such a beautiful quote. It is such a beautiful quote.
Yeah.
And then jumping into parallel realities and how we can,
Yeah.
there's quantum jumping now. I mean, we could go down
Yeah.
so many different roads, Richard. Um, so so where we are right now,
Yeah.
where do you see us going in the next 20 years, 50 years, your lifetime, my lifetime? What do you see humanity doing? Because we're moving at such a clip. I mean,
Mm,
from the birth of the internet was little over
mm,
25 years ago, really, you
mm,
know, with broadband. I mean, the real, like the popular birth of the internet, mid 90s. So mid to early 90s. So it's been 25, 30 years. And look how far, I mean, we've got AI now. Where do you see this going in the next 50 years for this mutation in ourselves?
Well, I may not see exactly the same as everyone else, but I kind of saw this in back in my heightened state of consciousness. I kind of wanted to know why this time, why now, why me seeing this, and it was framed in the context of this time. And sometimes when you look at the future, you assume it's going to be based on the patterns of the past. That's a natural thing to do. So you kind of look at us, you go AI, and then we're going to get to Mars, and then we're going to do this, and you kind of, that's how the mind thinks in a linear form. But during times of mutation, linearity breaks down. It has to. So there has to be, in order for a quantum leap to occur, like a new mutation in human DNA, it requires a huge shock, actually. It requires very difficult conditions in order, and a lot of heat and a lot of, usually some kind of trauma in order for that to kind of, that shift to occur. It's like birth, right? Birth is not an easy thing. And I'm a man, so I have no idea. But I can I've delivered my own child, and so I have a sense of
You had
what
front
that's
row
like.
seats, sir. You had front row
Yeah,
seats.
exactly. Thank you. But so birth is not easy, and so what I envisage happening is a kind of, not that we're going to go off on this nice trajectory, but that actually what's happening now to the planet is, with all the systems beginning to break down and collapse, and and the ecosystems also beginning to give way, that we're going to kind of hit a crisis, and as a species, and it's not going to be nice and comfortable, but we'll move through it, and we will come out the other side, and we'll come out the other side completely different. And I don't know what it looks like, but I imagine we'll bring some of our technology with us. But I think a lot of it is going to be slightly back to kind of simplicity, because when things start to really sort of fall apart, because we've built a world that is not sustainable, and our practices are not sustainable. And despite our best efforts of kind of heroic people, it's still, the mass consciousness doesn't have enough intelligence, actually, I would say, to kind of make a kind of a fix, put it like that. So because we have to go through these changes, so we have to go through these crises, these births, and I think that's what's coming for us. But through the gene keys, and especially gene key 55, which I describe a lot in my work and in the book, you get a focus on what's the other side look like. And it's really important to have that hope, more than hope, that certainty that this is meant to be this way for a reason, even though it's not going to be easy. We're going to come out the other side completely different. And that's why, in Gene Keys, my symbol is the dragonfly. And I talk about the story of the dragonfly and how a dragonfly is a bit similar to the caterpillar and the butterfly, but in a way more dramatic, because the dragonfly lives as a larvae underwater for 2 or 3 years, where it's a predator. And then it kind of comes up, suddenly it comes up a stalk of grass out into the light, and it starts to mutate and change. And within the space of 2 or 3 hours, it's become a beautiful iridescent creature of the air. And that is like an extreme, and it happens really fast. And that's a beautiful allegory of what's inside us. We have a dragon inside our genome. We have an incredible, iridescent, multidimensional, higher being hidden inside us. But it's got to go through this process of leaving its old environment, where it's predatorial, and it's got to take this huge risk and come up into the air and into the light. And then it's going to go through, it's going to shake its old life off, and something completely of another dimension is going to emerge. And so it's hard for us to imagine that, the vastness of the change. But that is what I kind of feel we're heading towards.
And I don't know about you, but I think the greatest moments of growth for me in my life have been the most difficult. Those are the ones when you're what is that? Honed by fire. Essentially, you walk through the fire and you're hardened by the fire. Not by the butterflies, not by the fluffy clouds. No, the fire, and it's not pleasant. So on an individual level, we all do that, and that's what kind of makes us who we are. That's the shrapnel that we take, that we walk around with. But I think also the planet and humanity itself, these old systems, as you say, are breaking down, and we can see those systems breaking down around us. It happened at a smaller extent in the Industrial Revolution, where like from the horse and buggy to the car, that was. But these institutions are much larger, and some older institutions like religion, religious institutions, political institutions, monetary economic institutions, medical I mean, all of them are, you could just see the cracks, and people are just starting to like, this is not working anymore. And you could see it in the numbers of people going to the movies. You can see it in people watching the news. Those numbers are all going down. And you notice that those institutions are becoming more desperate. They're becoming more, it's outlandish with their ads or with their things to get you to click. Like, no, don't go away. Here, look, someone just died. Come here. Like it's constant, but people are starting to pull away from that. So you're absolutely right. That we're going to be going through some stuff. And I think you're right. I think that all of us are going to go through something pretty dramatic. Probably within the next decade. I think something is going to happen. And I don't know what that is, but you could just see it around us. Look, I mean, Iran shooting missiles at Israel, and we got the Ukraine war, and we got this year's election here in the States and elections around the world. I mean, it's insane.
Our world is so fragile. The world systems we have built are interdependent on each other. It doesn't take much for a whole thing to collapse. It really doesn't.
Oh no, you just need a power outage and you understand how fragile you are. Just one power outage. You lose power to your house, it's basically a useless box, other than to keep the weather out and maybe keep some of the heat or cold in.
Yeah.
It's nothing works.
I mean,
you can't.
I think a lot of the planet will become uninhabitable for a while, and so that's going to cause a lot of migration, and that's going to cause even more war and conflict. And I mean, this sounds grisly, but actually I'm an incredible optimist, more than an optimist, because I had that download thing where I experienced the future human. And so I know it's a fact in my DNA. I know it as a cellular certainty. And that's why I started to teach around it and create a body of teaching so that other people could remember the same knowing, and it would hold us. So that's my goal really of the Gene Keys, to remind us and hold us through the change so that we know that we're heading towards something beautiful. and that would give us hope in dark times.
Richard, I have to imagine that you've been doing this for a few years now. So I imagine at one point or another, someone raised their hand and said, "This is absolute BS. This is malarkey. This is
Yeah,
hula." What do you say to skeptics about this? Because I'm sure someone listening right now, I'm like, these guys are out of their minds. What
yeah.
would you say to that? First of all, if they're still listening, why are you listening? You're obviously curious. So what's going on? But what would you say to someone who's skeptical about all of what we're talking about?
What would I say? I'd say, I don't know what I'd say. I'd say, why are you still here?
Why are you
Like,
watching this? Go
I
watch
mean,
something else.
my all-time favorite, because I used to look at my reviews on Amazon for my books and stuff, and
Oh,
in the
don't
early
do
days when you
that.
brought out a book, and when you first bring out a book and you're like curious, and you're really upset when you get a first bad review. And my favorite all-time review, I can't believe I'm saying this on with you, was it just was 2 words, and it gave 1 star, and it just said baffling crap.
Well, actually, that's a fantastic sentence. You
It
got to give
is.
it to that. It packs a punch.
It
Packs a.
really, it was just beautiful, and I really wanted to have a dialogue with that person, because I respect that kind of view. Actually, I
Yeah,
understand that it
yeah,
must seem crazy,
yeah.
but I think once you've had some awakened experience of some form, everything begins to change inside you, and you can't explain that to someone who hasn't had a glimpse themselves. You just can't. There's how are you going to get across that divide?
It's kind of like trying to explain to somebody, you know, your first love. If you've never
Yeah,
loved anyone and
yeah,
you're trying to explain to somebody about love, you sound like a maniac. You sound insane. Well, there's this thing, and they're like, no, like you just really can't even comprehend it. So you're right. And I think that once you do, just from my own, you know, for lack of a better word, awakening that I've had, things look different to me. Patterns start to appear. Like I've
yeah,
spoken to Robert Grant so many times on the show, and we've had a lot of personal conversations about it, and seeing patterns and how they interconnect with other
yeah,
things. And the goal of what I do is because I want to see the whole elephant. Most people
yeah,
just focus on the tail or the foot
yeah,
or the trunk or the
yeah,
ear, but I'm trying to connect all the points to get to the same truth. And the thing I keep seeing again and again is that everything you've talked about align with some of the great yogis I've spoken to on the show, spiritual masters, quantum physicists. All of this all connects. And that's
yeah,
what's fascinating. I haven't heard one person really come on and just go so off left field. They're like, no,
yeah,
no, no, our DNA is actually made of cheese. And like, I haven't heard that yet.
yeah, yeah. You know what's beautiful about the image of the elephant, like where you're looking at,
Mhm.
because you're talking about that, you only see one person only sees one part of it, and
Yeah, the Indian,
but
the old
actually,
proverb. Yeah.
if you dive deeply into anything enough,
Mhm.
so even if
Mhm.
you only look into the trunk of the elephant, but you look deep into the trunk and deep into the microscopic genome in that trunk, you'll actually see the whole elephant in that tiny fragment. That's
It's
what's
like
wild.
it's so beautiful. If I may quote the Matrix, one of my favorite movies of all time, and the scene where Neo is walking in to see the Oracle and is in the waiting room with the little like
Mm.
Buddhist child,
Yeah, no.
and he's bending the spoon with his
Yeah, yeah,
mind.
yeah,
And he's like, how do you bend the spoon? He's like, first you must believe that the spoon is not there, but when you
yeah,
understand the truth that there
yeah,
is no spoon.
yeah,
It's so
exactly.
profound. It's so
It
in an
is.
action in a Hollywood action
It
movie,
is.
which would
Yeah.
never get made today.
No.
Absolutely so profound. Richard, what are some of the we've talked about the gene keys so much. What is some of the biggest challenges people have with using them? Like there's obstacles of like not being able to connect with the material or the
Yeah.
ideas.
Well, I think it's at the beginning. Chinese have a saying, difficulty at the beginning. And it's natural, because you come in and it seems a bit overwhelming, and the concepts, like, you have to get your head around. So what I say to people, I say, this is not knowledge. So don't come towards it like you'd go towards knowledge, which is what you learned at school, what we all learned at school. Knowledge. Knowledge is something that's put into you. And this is not something that's being put into you. This is something that's here to access wisdom. And wisdom is already inside you. If wisdom has to come out, it has to be catalyzed or triggered or awakened. So the gene keys, that only purpose is for you to go towards it gently and be patient, and then use the art of contemplation. And then it starts to awaken inside you. It starts to trigger your own wisdom recognition. And so it's a very different way of moving towards something, because you can't grasp with your ego mind. You have to just allow and let it. It's a bit more of a romance, so you come in gently, and you come in and you let it percolate, and you savor it. You don't, if you get lost, that's okay. But we're always saying in Gene Keys, because we do a lot of online retreats, which are really popular, and ways of connecting with each other and following the teachings, and got a couple on right now, and with sort of thousands of people in them. And what we say to people is that, I haven't been able to do the thing, I'm left behind. And we're saying, like, no, you can't be left behind. You're just where you are. Like there is no left behind. There's just the pace at which you're moving, and that's natural to you. And so just trust in that pace. And that's why I teach, this art of contemplation. It's a slow. You want to get wisdom, it takes time. You want knowledge, you can get it quickly. It's fast food. Wisdom is slow burn, because it's inside. But when it comes out, it awakens something inside you. So it is a process of revelation. It is a process of awakening. And that's what Gene Keys is all about, really. So that's what overcomes that first trepidation of oh my God, there's too much I don't understand. It's just calm down. It's okay.
Well, it's kind of like, when you're going in for that first kiss.
Yeah.
With that first kiss, you're like, if you go in hot,
yeah,
it's not going to go in. You go in aggressive and hot, which is basically your ego mind going in and going, that's, whoa, no, that does not work. Any young men think, or women listening,
you're going to mistime that.
You're going to mistime that. You're going to bump heads. The nose is going to hit. It's not a good thing. But I love the idea of the romance, because it is something slow and you're feeling for it. You're not thinking. Because when you think, you're over, you're done. Yeah. It's when you feel that and using the analogy of the first kiss, you feel when it's right. The other person is signaling when it's right. And it's this slow process when you finally go in and kind of that's the term, romancing it out of inside of you.
It's why I use poetic language a lot, because I'm a bit of a poet myself. So I use in all my books and writings a poetic language frame, because that's what it's not poetry, but it's more about the sound and the kind of that sense of just enjoy the language, just let it in, like bird song. You don't analyze bird song, you just let it in. And then it starts to kind of find its way into your mind and into your emotions and into your body. And over a period of time, you actually start to have these little mini awakenings, or these insights, or these breakthroughs. Sometimes I call them epiphanies, and that's how you enter into the Gene Keys teachings. It's the same thing that happened to me. I had an epiphany. And so that's the way I know of arriving at truth. And you go in gently, and you allow it to seduce you. So it's a soft approach, as you said.
Very, very, very soft approach. I wanted to ask you one thing about the Gene Keys frequency and vibration. What does that play in these ideas of the mutating gene, the kind of evolving of consciousness through, or connecting to wisdom? What does that have to do with frequency and vibration, if anything?
Well, it's the foundation of the whole language of the Gene Keys is called the spectrum of consciousness, which are these words that are arranged in these three layers: shadows, gifts, cities. And it's a way of organizing the quantum world through language. And so they are bands of frequency. So a shadow frequency,
Well,
if you track your shadow frequency, it always keeps you in victim loops. So you can look at the gene keys that relate to your shadow patterns. It might be, reaction. Let's say you have reaction, the shadow of reaction, and that reaction keeps you in a loop because you're reacting emotionally through that kind of old memory of panic or fear or anger. And that's a level of frequency, and it just keeps you in the shadow frequency, and it draws other shadow frequencies towards you. So it creates entanglements and relationships with the same energy. As you start to transform those shadows, and they become gifts, and they become creativity in your life, because that's what happens. You become incredibly creative. Then suddenly the vista opens up, and you realize you've shifted frequency. DNA is operating at a different level of frequency. So it's emitting different light signature, and that attracts different light signatures. It attracts not so much, it attracts other people operating at the same level. So it attracts easier relationships, more beneficial relationships, people who are successful in some way or fulfilled. And then your whole world begins to shift. And then the highest level, I guess, the city level is, it's where you start to draw in like teachers, really embodied teachers or teachings that enable you to access and embody more of those higher heightened frequencies, like really high frequencies in your life. And then you begin to those high frequencies begin to guide you from inside you, and they connect you to a much broader destiny, a dharma, that is sort of your highest purpose. So I think we have levels of purpose, and to live your highest purpose, which is the purpose of the Gene Keys, to help you. That's the name on the front of my book, embracing your higher purpose in life. And it's not, because there's these layers of purpose. So you can have a kind of a lower purpose, a middle purpose, and a higher purpose, if you like. And you want to be in that high one, if possible. You want to be moving towards that one. So opening up this language of frequencies starts to entrain you, starts to change the way you think about yourself, the way you see yourself. You start to see yourself as one of those X-men, or X-women. You start to see yourself as filled with potential instead of trapped in some kind of victim loop that you think you can't get out of, you believe you can't get out of. So it changes the fundamental nature of your reality through doing the deep contemplative work. Does that make sense?
Oh, it makes all the sense in the world, and it completely connects to everything else I've learned from the masters I've spoken to. As in regard, you're essentially talking about a version of the law of attraction in a very basic way. And I hate to use the law of attraction since it's been so bastardized over the years, but that idea of we create our reality. That's an old concept from the Vedic times, that we create our reality, and you're just kind of breaking down how you do that. So with thoughts and things like that. But once you do it, you start attracting the correct vibration.
The thing with it is you have to do the shadow work. That's why the law of attraction sometimes doesn't work for people, because it's not enough to just have a nice thought pattern. You actually have to go into some uncomfortable, uncharted areas of your psyche and do some serious mining in there and transformation. And then after years of that, the law of attraction starts to kind of really open up inside you. But you can't bypass that inner work. And I think you see that a lot in the new age kind of stuff, that people are bypassing that work and sort of, so it can't really operate. I call it the law of unseen grace, which is what the law of attraction is built on. So it's deeper in a way. And unseen grace is where you don't realize that you already have right now everything exactly as you need it. That's unseen grace. So the moment you harvest, like, oh, wow, so this shit relationship that I can't is actually perfect for teaching me exactly what I need to transcend it. It is the perfect teaching, and it's trying to show you something. It's trying to lead you on a transformational journey so that you can change, your frequency, but you've got to go into the very thing that you want to avoid in order to get to the prize. I love that. That's kind of Shakespearean as far as I'm concerned.
Now, Richard, I'm going to ask you a few questions. Ask all my guests. What
Sure.
is your definition of living a fulfilled life?
Well, I think it's something connected to simplicity. Um, it's something very connected to being in the body, being embodied, and the love of the body, and um, the love of the form. So the love of the things of the world. It's not necessarily all about transcendence. Even everything I've said, it's about the love of each step along the ladders of frequency. Fulfillment is here now. It's not in the future. So it's all around us. So we have to harvest it in a That's why contemplation is a beautiful art, because it helps us harvest that fulfillment, that beauty that is around us all the time. And contemplation also slows us down. It's a little bit different from meditation. It's more whole system, so you do it when you're awake, when you're walking, when you're moving. It's a way of life, and it might include meditation as well, or mindfulness, but it's an approach that allows us to harvest the beauty that's around us. So I think that's the foundation of fulfillment for me.
Now, if you had a chance to go into a DeLorean and go back in time, what advice would you give little Richard? Not the musical star, you, sir.
Sure. That's okay. I've already given it to him. I've said, I would say, look, the two things that I've learned, right, that are most precious, two words, and they're really one: gentleness and patience. Gentleness with yourself, and patience with yourself, because all the places where you hurt or you feel stressed, or the wounded parts of yourself, that's what they most need, is you to be gentle with yourself and patient with yourself, so that you can heal on this journey. And those two qualities are like, they may sound soft, but they're the most intense discipline. To be gentle with yourself, so that you don't, you don't judge yourself too harshly, to soften, to open your heart again. That's an amazing thing to be able to do. And it goes with patience, because patience means you don't push, you don't, even if you're impatient, you can be patient with your impatience. It's like you just learn to be easy with yourself, and then things happen quicker. Your growth happens quicker.
How do you define God or source?
I guess, I bring it all back to love, really. I bring it back to love. That's like the Sufis have an old way, an old equation. It's the lover, the beloved, and love. And those three, that's the equation. Like the beloved, the lover, and love. Love is the thing that connects us. And this creation is the beloved. We're the lover. But you can also spin it however you want. You're also love. And, everything is about being a lover, for me, like at every level. So I'd say that is as close to God as anyone can ever get, is being a lover.
And what is the ultimate purpose of life?
I had a regression once. I'm going to answer that quickly. And she took me back to the beginning of things. And I was right back at that point. I said, the birth of my soul, and she said, well, and when you came in, what was your purpose? And when I heard that, I started to laugh. And I laughed and I laughed and I laughed. And then she started to laugh, and we both were just laughing and laughing, because that was the answer for me. It was like the purpose. You can't ask that question, because the answer is laughter.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
Mm.
Richard, where can people find out more about you and the amazing work you're doing with the Gene Keys?
Yeah. They can easily come to genekeys.com, and there's all kinds of stuff there. And also my YouTube channel has a lot of good free stuff. Gene Keys again. And one beautiful thing, it's a free app. It's a contemplation app that we created called the Triple Flame, and it's free and it's on the App Store, and it's really fun. I think you'd enjoy it actually, Alex. It's got lots of meditations and things on it from me that are really, short and long and all kinds of things. But it bings you every 3 hours for 3 minutes, and it gives you a pause. It asks you to pause for 3 minutes every 3 hours on the 3, 6, 9, 12 o'clock. And it also tells you how many other people are pausing using the app. And so it's the beginning of a pausing community around the world of people who are pausing to contemplate. And it's really beautiful because it slows you down. It makes you a more poetic, contemplative person. It reminds you that that's who you are. So it's a kind of lovely thing, and it's a nice way to kind of get in touch with some of my other stuff, because there's a lot on the app that's just free.
It's been such a pleasure talking to you, my friend. I know we can go down many more rabbit holes.
Likewise.
And we will absolutely do that in the future. So I appreciate you and everything you're doing to awaken our planet and to turn us into X-Men. So I appreciate you.
Thanks, Alex. It's a pleasure for me too. Really lovely to meet you.
Thanks for watching. Click on one of the videos below to continue your journey, and don't forget to subscribe.